I was the laundress of the big house, and my hands had forgotten what it felt like to be dry. Every morning before the sun rose, I would stand by the river where the fog clung to the water like a secret unwilling to be spoken. The air was cold, the kind that crawls through the seams of your dress and settles in your bones. My palms were cracked, the skin thin as parchment from years of soap and lye, yet I worked as if the whole world depended on the whiteness of another woman's linen. The house loomed behind me, tall, white, proud, like a thing alive. Its windows looked down at us, the ones who kept it breathing. I often thought that if every slave stopped moving for 1 hour, the whole place would collapse under the weight of its own silence. But we never stopped. Not once. The sound of scrub boards and the soft thud of wet cloth were our hymns. They called me Ruth, though that wasn't the name I was born with. The master said Ruth sounded biblical, respectable, like a woman who knew her place. I learned long ago not to correct white folks when they renamed you. Names were like garments. They could take them off you when they pleased. My corner of the world was the washing yard behind the cookhouse, where steam rose in ghostly ribbons. The smell of ash, soap, and damp cotton filled the air. The other women worked beside me, heads wrapped in scarves, bodies bent in rhythm. Sometimes we sang to keep time, low and mournful songs that sounded like prayers, though God hadn't answered us in a long while. I saw everything from that yard, who came and went, who argued in whispers behind the house, who lingered by the garden gate when they shouldn't. A laundress knew more secrets than any preacher. The stains told their stories. A child's handprint on a hem, perfume on a collar that didn't belong to the mistress, a speck of blood where there shouldn't be one. I washed them all away, but the truth stayed. It always stayed. The master's son, Thomas, was a small thing then, no more than 7. He'd wander down to the river sometimes, barefoot, curious, always out of place. The white children liked to watch us work. It made them feel powerful, I think, seeing grown women bow over water while they stood tall and clean. But Thomas was different. He asked questions about everything. Why the river was brown, why the soap stung our eyes, why my hands looked like old bark. I would answer softly, half smiling, half afraid, because kindness from a slave could be mistaken for insolence. "Doesn't it hurt?" he asked once when he saw the blisters on my fingers. "Not if you stop feeling it," I told him. He frowned as if trying to understand a language no one had taught him. The mistress didn't like him wandering near the quarters. She said too much closeness bred confusion, that lines needed keeping. But the boy never cared for lines. He'd chase dragonflies and skip stones while I washed, his laughter skipping, over the water. It reminded me of something I couldn't name, something I'd buried long ago. One morning, as I hung the sheets to dry, I caught sight of my reflection in the river. The woman staring back looked older than I remembered. Strong, yes, but hollowed out in places that couldn't be mended. I thought of freedom sometimes, not the kind that came with papers, but the kind that lived in silence, in the way the river kept flowing no matter what was built on its banks. That night the air turned strange. The wind carried a heaviness that made the dogs restless and the lamps flicker. I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, watching the big house glow faintly under the moon, and I felt it, that hum of something about to happen. I didn't know then that the boy I'd saved linens for, the one who laughed by the river, would soon need saving for real. I didn't know that the act that would make me the talk of the whole plantation would also uncover a secret deep enough to burn it all to the ground. But the river knew. It always did. The morning it happened began like any other. Mist over the water, the smell of wet linen, and the weight of another day pressing down on my shoulders. The river whispered its same tired song, the one it sang for slaves and masters alike, though only one of us listened. I had just set my washboard against a rock when I heard laughter behind me, high, sharp, and too close to the edge. Thomas. He was chasing a dragonfly, his small boots sliding in the mud, his blonde hair bright as sunlight against the gray morning. I called out for him to stay back, but the wind carried my voice away. The banks were slick from last night's rain, the kind that soaks the ground until it gives way underfoot. I watched as he leaned too far over the water, his reflection rippling beneath him. Then, nothing but a splash. For a heartbeat I froze, then instinct took me. The river wasn't gentle. It pulled like it wanted to keep what it caught. I ran down the slope, skirts heavy, lungs burning. The others screamed behind me, but their voices blurred with the roar of water. When I reached the edge, I saw him, arms flailing, face breaking the surface for only seconds before the current dragged him down again. I didn't think. I just jumped. The water was ice, slicing through me like glass. My breath vanished. The river took hold of my dress, twisting it around my legs as if to drag me under too. I kicked hard, eyes stinging, searching for the flash of pale fabric or hair. Then, there, a hand. Small, desperate. I lunged, caught his wrist and pulled. The current fought back, spinning us both. He gasped, swallowed water, went limp. I screamed his name, though my voice made no sound underwater. My arms ached, the weight of him, the weight of everything, years of toil, fear, silence, pressed down until I thought my bones would break. But something inside me refused to let go. I found my footing on a rock, heaved, upward, and somehow dragged us both to the shore. When we reached land, he was still. His lips were blue, his eyes half closed. For one terrible moment, I thought I had saved him only to lose him. I pressed my ear to his chest. Nothing. The others crowded behind me, crying out, afraid to touch him, afraid to touch me. I started pushing against his chest like I had once seen a midwife do to a newborn that wouldn't cry. I whispered his name again and again, willing life back into him. Then, a cough, a shudder. He spat water, gasped for air, and began to cry. That sound broke something open in all of us. I held him close, my dress soaked, my heart pounding like a drum. For a moment, the river, the house, the world itself disappeared. There was only the boy and the sound of him breathing. When the master's overseer came running down the path, rifle slung over his shoulder, I knew what would follow. No act of mine, no matter how noble, came without its cost. "What happened here?" he barked. "He fell," I said quietly. I pulled him out. His eyes narrowed. "You touched him?" I looked down at the boy still clinging to me, his small fingers wrapped in my torn sleeve. He'd be dead if I hadn't. The overseer stared at me a long time, his mouth tightening. "You'll come with me. Now." They carried Thomas back to the house, wrapped in blankets, the mistress shrieking orders and tears all at once. I followed at a distance, every step heavy with dread. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and panic. The doctor was called. The master himself came down the stairs, his face white as plaster. When his eyes found me, something flickered there. Confusion, anger, something else. "You saved him?" he asked, as though testing the words. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice small but steady. He nodded slowly, then turned away. "See that she's given rest." Rest. It wasn't mercy, it was control. Even gratitude had chains. By nightfall, word had spread through the quarters like wildfire. Some called it bravery. Others whispered I'd gone too far, touched what wasn't mine to touch. A slave saving a master's child. There was nothing clean about that kind of miracle. I lay awake that night in my small cabin, the sound of crickets filling the air. My body ached from the river, but my mind wouldn't quiet. I kept seeing his face, pale and frightened, and hearing the water pull him under. When sleep finally came, I dreamed of the river again. Dark, endless, whispering my name. The next morning, the mistress sent for me. Her eyes were cold when I entered her room. "You risked your life for my son," she said flatly, "but you remember your place, Ruth. Kindness can confuse people. My boy must not grow up confused." I bowed my head. "Yes, ma'am." As I turned to leave, she added, "Still, you have my thanks." The words felt wrong in her mouth, like a prayer spoken by someone who didn't believe in mercy. When I stepped outside, the sun was bright over the fields. The river shimmered in the distance, calm again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Rivers remember. They keep what we try to wash away. For days after the river, the plantation did not breathe the same. It was as if the air itself had changed texture, thicker, heavier, filled with voices that wouldn't quiet. Everywhere I went, whispers followed me like a shadow that refused to stay behind. At the wash yard, the women would lower their heads when I passed, their hands moving faster on the scrub boards, their voices low. They spoke about me as though I weren't standing among them, as though the act that saved the master's boy had turned me into something no longer one of them, yet not one of the whites either. She touched him with her own hands, one said, not even looking up. They say he nearly died, another answered, and she pulled him from death itself. And what if the mistress don't see it that way? I pretended not to hear, though every word pressed against my skin like a nettle. I'd lived long enough to know that attention, even the good kind, was dangerous. It drew eyes that might have otherwise passed over you. And eyes were the beginning of trouble. When I returned to my cabin that evening, I found Sarah waiting by the door. Old Sarah, who had been born on this land long before I was. Her back was bent, her hair thin and white, but her eyes still cut sharp as a knife. "They talking about you, girl," she said without greeting, "saying you did a thing that shouldn't be done." I sighed. Would they rather I let the boy drown? Sarah shook her head. "Ain't about what's right. It's about what's allowed. You forget that. You get hurt." Her words hung in the air long after she left. That night, I dreamed again of the river, its voice louder this time, almost human. It called my name in a way that felt like warning. When I woke, the moonlight was cutting through the cracks in the wall, painting stripes across my face like bars. I lay still and listened to the night sounds, the frogs, the rustle of trees, the distant creak of the big house. By morning, gossip had spread beyond the quarters. The house servants came with messages, pretending to be kind but eager to taste the story firsthand. One of them, Liddy, leaned close while pretending to hand me linens. "They say the master's grateful," she whispered, "said he might send you a gift." "A gift?" I asked, suspicious. "A dress maybe, or some ribbon from town. Mistress won't like it, though." Liddy smirked. "She'd been pacing all night. You done made her feel small, saving what she gave birth to." Her words turned my stomach. I didn't want gifts. I wanted peace. But peace was rare here, rarer even than mercy. By afternoon, the overseer called me to the main porch. He stood stiff as a fence, post, his eyes scanning me up and down. "You're to report to the big house after supper," he said. "Master wants a word." I nodded, though dread settled in my chest like a stone. When the sun set, I made my way up the hill. The house glowed with lamplight, its white columns tall and cold against the dark. I paused at the door, smoothing my apron, willing my heartbeat to quiet. Inside, everything smelled of oil and flowers. The mistress was seated on the settee, pale and composed, her hands folded over a lace handkerchief. The master stood by the window, looking out at the fields that stretched endless into night. When he turned, his expression softened, a look I'd never seen from him before. "Ruth," he said, "come here." I obeyed. My bare feet sank into the thick carpet, and for a moment I felt out of place in that room, like dirt tracked across a spotless floor. "You saved my boy's life," he said. "There's not much a man can say to repay something like that." "I only did what needed doing, sir." He smiled faintly. "You're a good woman, Ruth. Not many of your kind would have risked themselves for someone else's child." The words stung, even though they were meant as praise. Someone else's child. As if mine, if I'd ever had one, wouldn't have been worth saving. He handed me a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a blue ribbon, fine and bright as the sky. "Thank you, sir," I whispered. Behind me, I could feel the mistress's eyes burning into my back. When I returned to the quarters, the women crowded around, curious. They touched the ribbon as though it were something holy or cursed. "Don't wear it," Sarah murmured, crossing herself. "Nothing from a man like that come without price." I tucked it away under my mattress that night, unable to sleep. The air felt strange again, thick with waiting. In the days that followed, the whispers didn't stop. They grew. I could hear them even when no one was speaking. The cooks in the kitchen, the men in the fields, the stable hands brushing the horses. They all had opinions about the laundress who'd touched the master's son and lived to tell it. And yet beneath all the gossip something else began to stir, a sense that lines had shifted, however slightly. Some of the slaves looked at me with fear, others with pride. The white folks, though, they watched me differently now, as if trying to decide whether to punish me or use me. The mistress stopped speaking to me directly, sending orders through others. The master passed by the wash yard more often than before, his steps lingering. Each time I bowed my head, pretending not to feel his gaze. But late one evening, as the light faded and the crickets began their song, I felt it, the tension in the air, thick and silent, like the moment before a storm breaks. I knew then that saving that boy had done more than change one life. It had set something in motion, something that couldn't be undone. It was a week after the accident when the master came to the quarters. Nights had been uneasy since, full of strange silences and half-remembered dreams. The river's sound carried even farther at night, like it wanted to remind me it still existed, that it had not forgotten what I'd done. I was folding dry sheets by the lantern light when his shadow crossed the threshold. The flame flickered, long and thin, stretching his shape across the walls of my cabin. For a moment, I thought it was the overseer come to bring some late order, but then I saw the coat, the polished boots, the smell of tobacco and cologne. "Evening, Ruth," he said softly. I froze. No one from the big house came here unless something was wrong. My first thought was that Thomas had taken sick again, or worse. I set the sheets down carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sir," he stepped closer, ducking slightly to enter. The cabin was too small for someone like him. The air seemed to shrink around him. He looked around at the bare walls, the small cot, the bucket of water in the corner. "You keep it clean," he said, almost as if surprised. "Cleaner than some of the rooms up there." I didn't know what to say. Compliments from a man like him were knives with ribbon handles. He studied me for a long moment, then spoke in a tone too soft to be casual. "Thomas is doing better. The doctor says he'll make a full recovery." Relief slipped through me, though I dared not show it. "I'm glad, sir." "You should be," he said, stepping closer. "You did what no one else could. You risked your life for mine." I blinked. "For your son, sir." "Same thing," he murmured. The lantern hissed quietly between us. His eyes found mine, and I saw it then, the look I'd learned to fear in men, the one that confused gratitude with possession, the one that saw kindness as invitation. "You've served this family a long time," he continued. "You've proven loyalty, courage, devotion." He paused, choosing his words with care. "I don't forget such things." "Thank you, sir," I said, keeping my gaze on the floor. My hands trembled, hidden in the folds of my apron. He reached into his coat and drew out a small envelope. "There's something for you, a token, to remind you that I'm not ungrateful." I hesitated, but he held it out until I had no choice but to take it. Inside, I felt the weight of a few coins, silver, smooth, too heavy in my palm. "Sir, Take it," he said firmly. "You earned it." The way he said "earned" made the air feel different, as though the word carried meaning beyond what was spoken. I wanted to hand it back, but I couldn't. Not without insult. So I tucked the envelope into my apron and nodded. He stepped closer, close enough for me to smell the smoke on his breath. "You've got a good heart, Ruth. That's rare. Dangerous? Even." I held still. My heart was hammering, my throat dry. I wanted to run, but the door behind him felt a mile away. He reached out, not roughly, but with the kind of touch that carried ownership instead of affection. His hand brushed my arm, light as a whisper. I flinched anyway. He withdrew slowly, studying me again. "You needn't be afraid," he said, voice soft, almost kind. "I'm not a cruel man." The lie floated between us like smoke. When he left, the cabin felt smaller than before. The air he'd brought with him lingered, thick and wrong. I stared at the coins for a long time before setting them on the table beside the lamp. They gleamed there, bright and cold. Later, Sarah came by, as she often did after dark. The old woman took one look at my face and frowned. "He been here?" I nodded. She closed her eyes. "He'll come again." Her voice was steady, but there was something like pity in it. She sat beside me for a while, neither of us speaking. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, whispering like a warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight poured through the cracks, painting silver lines on the floor. I kept thinking about what he'd said, about kindness being dangerous. I'd thought saving a child was good, simple, pure, but nothing stayed pure here. Even water turned dirty when it sat too long in a barrel. The next day, the mistress sent for me. Her voice was colder than river stones. "My husband tells me he visited you." "Yes, ma'am." He says he rewarded you." "Yes, ma'am." Her lips tightened. "I suppose you think that makes you special." "No, ma'am." "Good." She took a step closer, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "You do well to remember that mercy is not the same as favor. The only thing separating you from the dirt under my feet is my word. Don't give me reason to take it back." I bowed. "Yes, ma'am." When she turned away, I saw her hands tremble. Jealousy, fear, something uglier, it all flickered across her face before she masked it again. I left the room with my heart pounding, the echo of her words trailing after me. I had never wanted power, only peace. But peace was a thing this house did not allow. That night, when I washed clothes by lamplight, I found myself scrubbing harder than usual, as though I could wash away the touch, the stares, the whispers. The water turned cloudy, gray with soap and dirt, and something darker that had no name. Somewhere beyond the trees, the boy laughed again. Thomas running through the garden, free of fever and memory both. His voice carried through the air, light and bright, unaware of what his rescue had begun. I looked up at the big house, its windows glowing like eyes that never blinked, and I knew then, the real sickness here wasn't in the boy. It lived in the walls, in the lies, in the quiet that followed every truth. And it was spreading. The morning after Thomas's recovery, I was summoned again, this time not to the laundry yard, but to the main house itself. The message came from one of the house girls, eyes wide as she whispered it. "The mistress wants you in the parlor," she said. I could tell by her trembling hands that she didn't envy me. I washed as best I could, scrubbed the river's memory off my skin, and walked up the steps I'd only ever scrubbed from the outside. Each one creaked beneath my bare feet, the wood smooth and warm in the sunlight. When I reached the door, I hesitated. I had never been invited in before, only ordered. The parlor smelled of lilacs and starch. The mistress sat near the window, a needle and thread in her hand, her white dress catching the light like armor. Thomas sat beside her on a small cushioned chair, a wool blanket over his knees. His face brightened when he saw me. "Ruth," he called out, smiling as if the distance between us meant nothing. The mistress's eyes snapped to him, then to me. "You will address her properly, Thomas." He frowned, confused. "But she saved me. That's quite enough." Her voice was cold, final. I bowed my head and said softly, "I'm grateful to see you well, Master Thomas." He didn't respond, but his small fingers clutched the edge of his blanket tighter. The mistress's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as she set down her sewing. "Ruth," she said, "I have spoken with my husband. What you did, while improper, cannot go unnoticed." I waited. Gratitude from her was a thing sharper than any blade. "You will no longer work by the river," she continued. "You will serve in the house. I find myself in need of a laundress who knows discretion and diligence. You've shown both." The words fell like stones in the silence that followed. To the others, it might have sounded like a blessing. To me, it was a summons into a cage with gilded bars. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She nodded, pleased. "You may begin tomorrow. And remember, your place here depends on silence. There are matters in this household that should remain unseen." Her meaning was clear. The house was full of secrets, and I had just been invited into their shadows. As I turned to leave, Thomas reached for my hand, but his mother caught his wrist gently. "Thomas," she said quietly. "That's enough." His blue eyes filled with confusion. But she? "Enough." I walked away before I could see more. That night in the quarters, the news spread like wildfire. Some envied me, others pitied me. "Better the river than that house," old Esther whispered, shaking her head. "There's ghosts in them walls, living ones." The next morning, I stepped into the house at dawn. Everything was too clean, too quiet. The hallways smelled of wax and roses, the light soft through tall windows. The first few hours passed in routine, collecting linens, ironing dresses, scrubbing lace that cost more than my life. But around midday, I began to notice things. A locked door at the end of the west corridor. Footsteps overhead when no one else was home. The mistress's voice raised in a tone not meant for servants to hear. Once, I heard the master himself speaking in hushed anger behind that locked door, his words low, hers sharp as steel. Then came the letters. On the third day, I was asked to fetch a bundle of laundry from the mistress's chambers. While folding the sheets, a sealed envelope slipped from the pile, falling open on the floor. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity is a dangerous hunger. The letter wasn't signed. The handwriting was a man's, neat and deliberate. It spoke of meetings at night, of promises, of debts that could not be repaid. The mistress's name was written once, softly, like a prayer or a curse. I folded it quickly, hard hammering, and placed it back exactly as I'd found it. But the words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after I returned to the quarters. That night, Thomas came down the servants' stairs. I was alone in the laundry room, starching collars. He crept in quietly, holding a candle that trembled in his small hand. "Ruth," he whispered, "why won't Mama let me see you anymore?" I looked at him, at the boy who had almost died in my arms. "Because your Mama loves you," I said carefully, "and she wants to protect you." "From you?" His question hit harder than I expected. I smiled faintly, hiding the ache behind it. "No, child. From the world that don't understand people like you and me being kind to each other." He nodded slowly, not understanding but pretending to. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me something small, an ivory button carved with a bird. "For you," he said. "So you remember I ain't forgot." I took it, my throat tight. "Thank you, Master Thomas," he grinned. "Just Thomas." Before I could answer, footsteps echoed above us, the mistress's voice, calling his name. He startled, turned, and hurried back up the stairs, candle flickering in his hand. I tucked the button into my pocket, not knowing then how much meaning it would hold in the days to come. That night, I dreamed again of the river, but this time, it was the mistress's voice I heard in the water, whispering secrets that sounded like warnings. When I woke, the button was still in my palm. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Somewhere in the distance, the locked door creaked open. The first time I stood outside that locked door, I could hear the sound of breathing from the other side. Slow, deliberate, heavy, as if someone were listening just as hard as I was. The keyhole was small, but the silence around it was vast. I carried a basket of folded linens, pretending to wait for orders, though what I really waited for was courage. The door had fascinated me since the day I entered the house. Every corridor gleamed with polished wood and the smell of lemon oil, but that one door, painted dull gray, brass-handled tarnished, was an intruder among the perfection. The mistress avoided walking past it. The servants whispered it had once led to a study, long closed after the master's brother died. But I had begun to sense something else. The letters, the late-night voices, the way the master's eyes lingered too long on the stairs where I stood, always half hidden in the shadows. That morning, he caught me there. "What are you doing?" His voice startled me so sharply that the basket nearly fell from my hands. "Waiting for orders, sir." He studied me for a moment. "That door is not your concern." "Yes, sir." His gaze softened, barely. "You've been in this house for some time now, haven't you?" 3 weeks, sir." "And my wife?" He hesitated, the faintest flicker of distaste crossing his face. "She treats you fairly?" I nodded. "As she sees fit, sir." A thin smile tugged at his mouth, humorless. "Good answer." He turned the key in the lock and stepped inside. For a moment before the door closed, I glimpsed what lay beyond. A desk littered with papers, shelves crowded with books, a single oil lamp burning though it was morning. And something else. A portrait turned to face the wall. He shut the door softly, and I stood frozen in the hall, haunted by the image of that backward-facing face. That evening, when the rest of the house fell into sleep, I crept back. The air was cooler, quieter. I pressed my ear to the door again. At first, there was nothing. Then, the faint rasp of pages turning. A voice, his voice, murmuring words I couldn't make out. Then, another voice answered, lower, familiar. The mistress, my breath caught. They argued in whispers, but the bitterness in them filled the silence like smoke. Her voice shook when she said, "You swore it was finished." "I swore nothing," he hissed. "You wanted comfort, and I gave it. That's all." "You promised." "I owe you no promises now." The sound of glass shattering followed. I flinched, stepping back, afraid they'd hear me. But their voices continued, distant now, rising and falling like the tide. I fled down the corridor before my curiosity cost me my life. In the laundry room, the fire was still burning low. I sat before it, trying to calm my trembling hands. The house was built on secrets, and I had just stumbled into one of its deepest. I didn't know what bound the master and mistress together, but I could feel the cracks widening between them. Days passed. The mistress avoided me, her words clipped, her eyes shadowed. The master disappeared into that room for hours, sometimes all night. Once, I found a torn page in the hallway, a man's handwriting again, the same I'd seen on the letter. The ink had run, but I could still read the words, "The child must never know." That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter, the whispers, the portrait turned away. All of it circled in my mind like vultures. I thought of Thomas, of his bright eyes and innocent smile, and dread filled me like cold water. What child did they mean? The next day, Thomas came looking for me again. He found me in the laundry, pressing sheets with the heat of an iron. "Ruth," he said softly, "Mama and Papa are fighting again." I kept my face still. "You shouldn't say such things, Master Thomas." "It's true," he insisted. "I heard Papa say something about secrets, about you." My hands froze. "About me?" He nodded. He said, "She don't even know what she's part of." "What does that mean?" My heart stumbled in my chest. "It means grown folks talk foolish sometimes, that's all." He frowned. "But you saved me. Why would they talk bad about you?" I forced a smile. "Because saving people don't always make you safe, child." He looked down, thoughtful, then slipped something into my hand. A folded paper. "I found this by the study door," he whispered. "I think it's yours." He hurried away before I could answer. I unfolded the note with shaking fingers. It wasn't mine, but it was addressed to me. "Ruth, if you value your life, stay away from the river at night. No signature, just those words." That evening, the house fell into a strange silence. The mistress retired early, her door locked. The master didn't appear for supper. The air itself felt thick, heavy with things unsaid. I sat awake by the window of the small attic room they'd given me, clutching the paper until dawn broke pale across the fields. My mind spun with questions that had no answers. Why warn me? What did the river have to do with this house, and what truth could destroy everything they'd built? The next morning, I found out that the master had gone down to the river before sunrise, and that he hadn't returned. When the overseer came pounding on the cabin doors at dawn, shouting for every hand to get to the river, I already knew what we would find. I had dreamed it again, the dark current curling like smoke, the sound of something heavy slipping beneath the water's skin. The same dream that had come the night before Thomas fell in, only sharper now, colder. The river mist hung thick that morning, blurring the world into gray and white. The sun had not yet climbed above the trees, and every breath felt like swallowing ghosts. The men waded into the shallows, poles and ropes in hand, searching. The women stood on the bank, shawls pulled tight, their silence louder than any prayer. I stayed back at first, holding Thomas against my hip. The mistress refused to come down. She had locked herself in her room, refusing even the doctor who knocked at her door. Her absence weighed heavier than the fog. "Move downstream," the overseer barked. "He couldn't have gone far." Hours passed. Then one of the men shouted. The sound cut through, the mist like a blade. They pulled him from the reeds, clothes torn, face pale, eyes half open to a sky that did not care. The master. Thomas began to cry before he even understood why. I held him tighter, whispering words I didn't believe myself. "Don't look, baby, don't look." The overseer knelt, checked for breath, then crossed himself. "He's gone." The river lapped quietly against the bank as if satisfied. They carried his body back to the house on a wooden board, the wet cloth dripping a thin trail along the path. I followed behind them, Thomas clinging to my dress, his small voice repeating, "He was going to take me fishing today. He promised." Inside, chaos waited. The mistress had come down at last, her hair undone, eyes hollow. When she saw him, she didn't scream. She just stopped moving. Then, Very quietly, she said, "It's done." No tears, no questions, only that. The doctor whispered that it looked like drowning, maybe an accident. But I saw the marks on his wrists when they laid him out, thin, red like rope burns. I said nothing. Silence was my survival. By nightfall, the house was draped in black cloth. The mistress stayed upstairs, her door locked once more. Thomas wouldn't eat. I sat with him in the corner of the parlor, the candlelight trembling across his face. "Ruth," he said softly, "does the river take people forever?" "Sometimes," I said. "Sometimes it gives them back." He looked up at me with wet eyes. "Do you think it'll give Papa back?" My throat tightened. "No, child. Not him." When he finally slept, I slipped outside, drawn toward the sound of water like a moth to flame. The moon sat low, silvering the trees and the long stretch of river that coiled behind the house. It looked peaceful again, as though it hadn't swallowed a man just hours before. But peace like that is always a lie. Something moved near the reeds. I froze. A figure stood there, tall, thin, cloaked in shadow. For a moment I thought it was him, the master come walking out of death itself. But then the figure turned, and I saw the face clearly. The mistress. She was barefoot, her white gown soaked to the knees, her hands trembling. In one hand she held a piece of torn paper. The same paper I'd found days ago, the one that warned me to stay away. She didn't see me at first. She was talking softly to the river. "You took what I couldn't keep," she whispered. "You always do." Then she tore the paper into pieces and scattered them into the current. The fragments floated for a heartbeat, then vanished beneath the dark water. I stepped forward. "Ma'am?" She turned sharply, startled, her face pale in the moonlight. "Ruth," she breathed, "you shouldn't be here. I came to check the river, ma'am, for the child's sake." Her expression shifted, something between grief and suspicion. "You think I killed him?" she asked suddenly. Swallowed hard. "No, ma'am. Don't lie." Her voice cracked, thin and wild. "He was going to ruin everything, all of it. You think I didn't know?" The wind stirred her hair, and for the first time I saw the truth flicker behind her eyes. Not madness, but calculation. She took a step closer. "He was going to tell Thomas. He was going to tell him who you are." Her words hit me like a blow. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides knives. "He thought I didn't know, but I read his letters. I saw the papers in his study. You were more than just a laundress, Ruth. You were his sin and his son's salvation." I couldn't speak. My mind reeled. She stepped into the river, the current curling around her gown. "He brought you here for a reason," she said, "and now he's gone and you'll live with the secret he left behind. Ma'am, please, come back." She turned to me one last time, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Tell the boy his father loved him. That's all he needs to know." Then she walked deeper into the water. I ran forward, shouting, but the river swallowed her too easily. One flash of white, a ripple, and she was gone. The next morning, they found her shawl tangled in the reeds, but no body. Thomas wouldn't stop crying. The overseer said she must have gone mad with grief, but I knew better. She hadn't drowned in sorrow. She had chosen it. That night, I sat on the porch steps, the ivory button clutched tight in my hand. The house was silent now, the kind of silence that follows confession. I watched the river shimmer under the stars and whispered, "You can keep your secrets." But deep down, I knew the river would return one more thing before it was done. The house never truly recovered after that night. Grief has a way of seeping into the walls, settling in the wood grain, the fabric, even the air. Every sound seemed to echo louder now, the creak of stairs, the flutter of curtains, the distant caw of crows at dawn. The mistress's room remained locked. The master's study stood empty. And Thomas, poor child, carried silence like a second skin. Days turned into weeks. The funeral was quiet, short, more for appearance than mourning. The overseer stood beside the minister, both men sweating under their collars, saying words they didn't believe. The mistress's absence hung heavier than the coffin itself. Afterward, life resumed its rhythm, but slower, hollower. The house servants avoided the upper floor. The field hands whispered that the mistress's ghost walked near the river at night. I didn't believe in ghosts before, not the kind that take form anyway, but I had begun to believe in hauntings of another kind, the kind that live inside the living. Thomas spent most of his time alone. The laughter that once followed him through the halls was gone. He took to sitting on the back steps, staring toward the fields where the fog rolled low and silver. I often found him there after supper, quiet and still. One evening, as the sky bled orange and purple, I brought him a cup of milk and a biscuit. He didn't look up when I set them beside him. "Don't you want to eat, baby?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "Papa's gone. Mama's gone. You'll go next." The words chilled me. "Now why would you say a thing like that?" He shrugged, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Everyone I care for goes away." I knelt beside him. "You listen to me, Thomas. I ain't going nowhere. I promised your mama I'd look after you." He turned then, frowning. "You talked to her?" "When?" I hesitated. "That night by the river." "You saw her?" His voice rose with sudden hope. "I saw her, yes, but she wasn't the same." He leaned forward. "Did she say anything? Did she talk about me?" I nodded slowly. "She said to tell you your father loved you, and she loved you too." He blinked hard, fighting tears. "Then why didn't she stay?" I sighed. "Because some people don't know how to stay, no matter how much they love." He looked away again, and for a long while, neither of us spoke. The cicadas started their evening chorus, loud and endless. After that day, he began following me everywhere, into the laundry, the garden, even the kitchen. The servants watched in silence, uneasy. A white child clinging to a black woman was a sight that made tongues wag and tempers flare. The overseer warned me more than once to keep him in his place, but Thomas wouldn't listen to anyone else. One afternoon, as I hung linens in the back field, he asked, "Ruth, were you born here?" "No, child, I was sold here." "From where?" "A place far south. Don't remember much now, just the smell of rain and iron." He frowned. "Do you miss it?" I smiled faintly. "You can't miss a thing that never let you belong." He seemed to think about that a long time. Then he said, "Papa used to say everyone belongs somewhere, even the ones nobody wants." My hands stilled. "Did he say that?" He nodded. "He told me once that he made a mistake he could never fix. He said the river forgives nothing." The words lodged deep inside me like thorns. The river again. Always the river. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, I crept into the study. The door opened easily now. The air smelled of dust and damp paper. Moonlight spilled across the desk, illuminating the mess the master had left behind. Letters, ledgers, half-burned notes. I rifled through them carefully until I found a stack tied with twine. The handwriting was his, but the dates reached back years. The first letter began with my name. "Ruth, if anything happens to me, the truth must not die with her silence. You have a right to know what they kept from you." My breath caught. I read on. He wrote of the old days, before the mistress, before the plantation changed hands. He spoke of a woman, dark-skinned and kind-eyed, who had worked in the same house as he once did. Her name was Hannah. He wrote that he loved her in secret, that she bore a child. But the mistress had found out. She couldn't bear the shame, the letter said. So she arranged to have the child taken, sold north before it could walk. My vision blurred. My hands trembled so violently I could hardly keep reading. I searched for years, Ruth. I thought the child dead. Then, one spring, a bill of sale crossed my desk. A laundress from Charleston. Her name was Ruth. I knew the name. I knew the eyes. "I bought you back." The paper slipped from my fingers. The room tilted. "Bought me back." The river outside murmured against its banks, the sound now more voice than water. I staggered to the window, clutching the sill, my reflection ghost-like in the glass. All those years, all that silence. The man I called master had been my father, and the boy asleep upstairs, Thomas, was my brother. I sank to the floor, tears burning down my cheeks. The truth had come at last, as sharp and cruel as any whip. For a long time I could only sit there, the letter open beside me, the candles guttering low. Then I heard a sound, a floorboard creaking. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face pale, eyes wide. "Ruth," he whispered. Why are you crying? I tried to hide the letter, but he had already seen it. He stepped closer, reading the name at the top, then looking at me with something like recognition. Papa wrote that, he said softly. Is it bad? I forced a smile through my tears. It's just old words, baby. Don't you worry about them. But the river outside was rising, and I knew the truth could not stay buried forever. The storm came the next evening, sudden and violent, as though the sky itself had read that letter and wanted to wash away what it knew. By nightfall, thunder was rolling across the hills, and the wind howled through the cracks of the house like something alive. Every door shuddered, every window rattled. Thomas clung to me in the parlor, frightened by the noise. The candles flickered, throwing wild shadows on the walls where portraits of the dead stared down as though judging the living. It's just thunder, baby, I whispered, stroking his hair. It'll pass. He shook his head. It sounds angry. Maybe it is, I said softly, my eyes drawn to the window where lightning flashed over the fields. Sometimes the sky gets tired of keeping secrets, too. He looked up at me, confused, but before I could say more, the overseer burst in, soaked through, shouting above the wind. The river's rising, flooding the fields already. We need to move the livestock. He saw us there and stopped short, eyes narrowing. What are you doing with him down here? Get back to the quarters where you belong. He's scared, I said quietly. He shouldn't be alone. His face twisted. You forget your place, girl. You think saving that boy makes you family? Something in me snapped then. The letter burned in my pocket like fire. I rose slowly, keeping my voice low but steady. Maybe family ain't what you think it is. He stared at me for a moment, taken aback by my tone, then spat on the floor. Careful, girl. The storm ain't the only thing that can strike. He turned and left, slamming the door behind him. Thomas looked up at me, wide-eyed. Ruth, what did he mean? Nothing, baby. Just words. But the storm outside was no longer just weather. It was a reckoning. As the night deepened, the house groaned under the wind. Water began seeping beneath the doors, pooling on the floorboards. I took Thomas by the hand and led him upstairs to safety. The air was thick with rain and memory. When we reached the top landing, I hesitated outside the master's study. The door hung slightly open, swaying with each gust that shook the house. I could see the papers still scattered across the desk, the letter I hadn't dared to burn. Thomas tugged at my sleeve. Ruth, why are we here? Because there's something you need to know. I knelt before him, my hands trembling. You remember what I told you about your papa's letters? He nodded. There's one more. It's about me. And about you. He frowned. Did Papa say something bad? No. My voice cracked. He said something true. I drew the folded letter from my pocket and placed it in his small hands. The candlelight flickered over the ink, over the words that had shattered everything I thought I knew. Read the first line, I whispered. He struggled with the handwriting, sounding out each word. Ruth, if anything happens to me. He stopped. This is to you. Yes. He looked up, confused. Why? Because Thomas, your father was my father too. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain beating the roof. His eyes widened as the meaning took shape. You mean? I nodded slowly, tears breaking free. You're my brother. For a long time, he said nothing, just stared at me, his face pale, his lip trembling. Then he whispered, That can't be true. I wish it weren't. He shook his head, backing away. No. Mama would have told me. Papa wouldn't. He didn't mean for you to know, I said gently. He thought it would ruin you. But the truth don't stay buried forever. Lightning flashed, illuminating the walls. For an instant, we both looked toward the portrait turned backward, the one I had seen that day he died. Without thinking, I walked to it and turned it around. The frame creaked as dust fell away. The face staring back was the master's, young, proud. But beside him stood a woman with dark skin and kind eyes. Hannah, my mother. Thomas gasped. That's not Mama. No, I whispered. That's mine. He covered his mouth, trembling. Then you... Yes, baby, I'm the child they took. He bought me back without anyone knowing. I thought it was mercy. I didn't see the guilt behind it. He began to cry, the sound breaking me in ways I didn't know I could still break. I gathered him into my arms, holding him tight as the storm roared outside. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry you had to know." He buried his face in my shoulder. "I don't care. You're all I have left." I pressed my lips to his hair, the smell of rain and candle smoke thick around us. "Then that's enough." But the storm wasn't finished. A crash of thunder shook the floorboards. Somewhere downstairs, glass shattered. The wind tore through the house like fury itself. The river was at the doorstep, its roar louder than prayer. "Ruth!" the overseer shouted from below. "Get the boy out! The bridge won't hold!" I grabbed Thomas's hand and ran. The stairs trembled beneath us, water rushing in around our ankles. The front door burst open under the pressure, and the river came spilling through like it had been waiting. We fought through it, step by step, until the porch gave way and the current took us. I held him close, the world spinning into chaos, branches, debris, pieces of our lives tumbling around us. The water was cold, merciless. I could barely see the sky. Thomas screamed, reaching for me, and I pulled him tighter, kicking hard, praying to any god who still listened. Somehow we caught hold of a tree trunk drifting by. I hoisted him up, my arms raw, my lungs burning. "Hold on, baby," I shouted. He nodded, clinging to the bark. The current spun us, but the tree wedged against the bank, stopping our drift. I pushed him toward solid ground first, then dragged myself up beside him. We lay there for what felt like hours, coughing, shaking, alive. When I looked back, the house was half gone. Its windows shattered, its walls collapsing into the flood. The storm had taken everything. But maybe that was its purpose, to cleanse what was rotten, to leave behind only what could still grow. Thomas turned to me, his voice small. "What do we do now?" I brushed the wet hair from his face and managed a trembling smile. "We live." By dawn, the storm had passed. What it left behind was silence, thick, heavy, and unreal. The river had swallowed half the fields, and where the house once stood was only a skeleton of broken beams and blackened stone. Smoke rose from the ruins, thin and gray, curling into the pale morning sky like the last breath of a dying world. Thomas slept beside me under the shelter of a fallen tree. His small hand clung to my sleeve even in his dreams. He was alive, and that should have been enough. But my heart was still racing, still trying to understand the line between mercy and punishment, between salvation and ruin. When he stirred, I brushed his hair back gently. "You're safe now, baby." He blinked up at me, dazed. "Is the house gone?" "Yes." He looked toward the smoke. "Then Mama and the others." I hesitated. "We'll see who made it." We started walking, the mud sucking at our feet, the air thick with the scent of wet ashes and burnt wood. The world felt smaller now, as if the sky had bent lower to witness what we had done. Every step forward was a memory collapsing behind us. When we reached the hill overlooking the main yard, we saw them. The survivors gathered in a shivering cluster near the carriage house. The overseer stood apart, shouting orders that no one obeyed. His coat was torn, his hat gone, his face streaked with mud. The mistress was there, too, wrapped in a blanket, her hair undone, her eyes wild and hollow. She looked less like a lady now and more like a ghost who hadn't realized she was dead. When she saw us, her expression twisted. "Get away from him!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You did this! You brought the storm!" Thomas flinched. I held his hand tighter. "No, ma'am," I said softly. "The storm came because of you." Her lips trembled. "Liar! You bewitched him. You poisoned this house." The overseer stepped forward, glancing between us. "She's lost her senses," he muttered. "Been raving all morning." But she wasn't mad. Not yet. She was cornered, and the truth was pushing through her like light through cracks in glass. "Tell them," I said quietly. "Tell them what you did to keep your secret." Her eyes darted toward Thomas, and something inside her seemed to break. She sank to her knees, sobbing. "I didn't mean for him to get sick. It was meant for you." The words fell like stones. The crowd gasped. I stepped closer, every breath shaking. "You poisoned me?" Her voice cracked. "I wanted you gone. He loved you. He said your name in his sleep." She covered her face with her hands. "I just wanted my life back." Thomas trembled beside me, staring at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Mama?" She looked up, tears streaking the soot on her cheeks. "I did it for us, Thomas. For our family." He shook his head slowly. "We don't have a family anymore." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the overseer looked away. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of char and river water. I bent down and touched the wet ground where the house once stood. Beneath the mud, I could still feel the heat of what had burned. Somewhere beneath all that ruin were the letters, the truth I had hidden before the storm came. The mistress staggered toward me, clutching at her blanket. "Give them to me," she hissed. "You have no right." I rose to my full height. "No right to what? To the truth. You had all the rights, ma'am. I just had the pain." She froze, her mouth open but no sound coming out. The overseer grabbed her arm, dragging her back as she fought weakly against him. The sun broke through the clouds then, a pale, washed-out gold. It fell across the ruins like judgment, and for the first time I saw the plantation as it truly was. Not grand, not proud, just bones and smoke. One of the field hands, old Samuel, approached quietly. "Ruth," he said, his voice hoarse. "What now?" I looked at Thomas. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with ash, but his eyes, those eyes, still held something unbroken. "We take the boy," I said. "We find dry ground, somewhere the water don't reach." Samuel nodded. "And the mistress?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Behind us she sank to the ground, rocking back and forth, whispering names that no longer belonged to her. By noon, the authorities arrived from the next town. White men on horses, faces stern, eyes sharp. They questioned everyone. Who started the fire? Who opened the dam? Who lived? Who died? Who mattered? When they reached me, I stood tall and told them what I could without telling too much. I said the storm came quick, that the river rose faster than any of us could move. I said I tried to save the family. That was true enough. One of them, a gray-haired man with a scar on his cheek, nodded slowly. "And the letters? We heard there were papers recovered." My pulse quickened. "I don't know about no letters, sir, just clothes and ashes." He studied me for a long moment, then turned away. "Get the survivors fed and housed. The rest, let the river take them." By sunset, the officials were gone. The fields lay silent except for the creak of burned timber. The mistress was taken away, still muttering, her eyes empty. The overseer vanished before nightfall. I found myself standing alone where the laundry yard used to be. The wash barrels were overturned, their contents scattered by the flood. I reached down and lifted one of them, a half-burned plank of wood, smooth from years of soap and water. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, the letters were still there, untouched. I pressed them to my chest. They felt heavier now, not with words, but with everything they had cost. Thomas came up beside me, his small voice breaking the quiet. "Are we going home now?" I looked at the horizon, the sun setting over the water, turning everything gold and red. "We are home," I said. He frowned. "But there's nothing here." "There's us," I whispered. "That's what's left when everything else burns." He took my hand, and together we watched the light fade. The air smelled of smoke and river mud and something else, something like peace, if peace could ever grow in such soil. When the first stars appeared, I turned to him and said, "Come on, baby. Tomorrow we start clean." And as we walked away from the ruins, the wind behind us carried only ashes. The morning after the fire broke with a strange kind of stillness, the kind that makes you wonder whether the world is holding its breath or mourning what it's lost. Mist hung low over the fields where cotton used to grow, soft and gray, hiding the stumps and ashes beneath. I stood there barefoot, the ground cool and wet beneath my feet, watching the steam rise from the black soil. It smelled of rain and burnt sugar, of endings. Thomas slept under a canvas sheet we'd found in one of the wagons. His face was peaceful now, the first real sleep he'd had in days. He looked younger again, softer. For a moment, I almost forgot what the world had done to him, to us. Almost. In my hands, I still held the bundle of letters, damp but unburned. The ink had bled on some, but the words were still legible enough to wound. I'd read them all through the night, each one peeling back another layer of the lies that built this place. each one signed with the same trembling name that once carried all the power in this valley. They told the story of a man who tried to own both the land and the people who worked it, but couldn't own the truth. They told of love he was too cowardly to claim, of a child he hid because the world would rather burn than admit the blood between them. And they told of the poison that was meant to silence guilt, but found its way to innocence instead. The secret wasn't just that Thomas and I shared the same father. It was that the system built around us depended on that secret to survive. The same hands that preached purity had written their sins into ledgers and wills. The same mouths that called me less than human had whispered my mother's name in the dark. That was what destroyed everything. Not one act, not one night, but the truth that had been rotting beneath the surface for years, waiting for rain to bring it up. When Thomas woke, he found me sitting by the riverbank, the letters spread out beside me like fallen leaves. He rubbed his eyes, blinking at the pale morning light. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No," I replied. "Some things won't let you rest till they're done." He looked at the papers. "Are those Papa's?" "Yes, they're the reason the house fell." He frowned, picking one up. "Then why keep them?" I stared at the water, where the current carried bits of ash and bark downstream. "Because truth deserves to be remembered, even if it hurts." He came and sat beside me, his voice small. "What will we do now?" I took a deep breath. The answer had been forming all night. "We'll go east, to the town past the ridge. There's a church there that takes in orphans. You can start over, go to school maybe." He looked up sharply. "What about you?" "I'll find work, maybe laundry again. It's what I know." He frowned. "You're coming with me, right?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to promise him that I'd never leave. But the truth had its own pull, and I'd felt it growing stronger since the storm. "Thomas," I said, quietly, "the people who'll raise you, they'll see you as one of them. That's how you'll survive. You don't need me shadowing that life. I'll only remind them of what they want to forget." He shook his head. "I don't care what they want. You're my sister." The word caught in my chest. Sister. A word I'd never thought I'd hear from anyone with his skin. I reached out and held his hand, small and warm in mine. And I'll always be that. But sometimes loving somebody means letting them walk free, even if you stay behind. He began to cry, silent tears that slid down his cheeks. I gathered him into my arms and rocked him the way I used to when he was sick. "You remember what I told you by the river?" I whispered, "that the sky gets tired of keeping secrets?" He nodded. "Well, now it don't have to. The truth's out. That means something good can grow here one day." We sat there till the mist began to lift and sunlight touched the ruined fields. The air shimmered with the sound of crickets and the distant low of cattle that had survived the flood. Life, stubborn and quiet, was beginning again. When it was time, I packed what little we had into a sack, some bread, a blanket, and the letters wrapped in oilcloth. We walked the dirt road together until we reached the crossroads, where the path split, one toward town, one toward the hills. "This is it," I said softly. Thomas squeezed my hand. "You'll come back?" "If the good Lord allows," I said. "But even if I don't, you'll know where to find me." "Where?" "In every drop of water that touches this land," I whispered, "in the wind that smells of soap and smoke, in every truth you carry, even when you can't tell it out loud." He threw his arms around me, and I held him tight one last time. Then I turned him toward the town road and watched him walk, his figure growing smaller with every step until the sun swallowed him. I stood there long after he was gone, until the silence became a kind of music. Then I opened the letters one final time, reading the last one slowly, savoring the ache in every line. It ended with words I'd never seen before. "Forgive me, Ruth. The truth was too heavy for me. Maybe it'll be light enough for you." I folded the paper carefully and placed it in the river. The current took it gently, carrying it past the bend where the house once stood, past the stones and reeds out toward a world that didn't know our names. As the sun climbed higher, I whispered to the water, "Truth washes all, but never clean." Then I turned away from the plantation for the last time, walking barefoot through the wet fields, the sky wide and endless above me. Behind me, the land smoked faintly, still healing from what had burned. Ahead, the road shimmered in the heat, empty and waiting. Every step felt like both a wound and a blessing. Every breath tasted of freedom I didn't yet understand. By noon, the river song had faded behind me, but I could still feel it in my bones, the weight of everything I'd carried and everything I'd set free. And though the world would never know my story, I knew this much. I had saved a life, unearthed a lie, and burned a house built on both. That was enough. The wind rose, warm and clean, and I kept walking.